Hi, I'm Mark Rutten. Welcome back to Nomad Boat Building, and today on the 2.4 meter project, we're going to finish building our rudder. The last episode, we looked at some of the elements of the rudder design, and in this episode, we are going to assemble the rudder itself and get it shaped. So without further ado, let's get right back to work. I've got the drawing for my rudder assembly here, and here's my rudder stock, and I basically have to relieve the rudder blades itself to allow this little stainless steel tang to sit in there. Here's my rudder stock right there. And I've already cut a slot for the tube to sit into. I just need to set my height. So I've designed it to work around just using this zinc pulley here. This is really a bit of a cost-saving measure. We can always make this out of something else if this doesn't work out, but we thought we'd give it a try. And this was the customer's suggestion. And it basically is going to sit up here. I'll just show you. So this would sit right here at the top of our rudder stock. And I've got this little stainless steel split collar right here, and that is going to keep the rudder from dropping down into the ocean. And then we've got this little stop collar right there, and that's just basically a Delrin bushing that I built. So that'll ride there. We've got our fiberglass tube that's going to butt up to our planking and get glued in place. And then below the planking, we've got another little Delrin bushing that's going to sit down there. And the rudder itself has got a little stainless steel key. And to make this, I used some stainless steel tube. Had a friend weld the tang on here. I filled the end of this tube with epoxy with high density filler and put a little wooden plug in there so it wouldn't drain away, and then we've machined the keyway into that. So it's riding primarily on the surface of the stainless steel tube, but then the epoxy plug just keeps it from falling out. So I think that's going to work pretty good. So my main goal right now is just figuring out exactly how far into the rudder blade this thing should sit. So I'm just going to use my drawing and just lay it right on top here. And then down here I've got this little wooden plug that'll fill in this hole down here, and it looks like I'm kind of short by 1/4 inch, so I might just make another wooden plug to fill out the difference. Maybe we'll bring it up a hair as well. That looks pretty good to me right there. And these holes I've drilled in the tang, these are really just to allow epoxy to pass through and help to bond the two halves together in the area of the tang. Of course, and this little haunch was supposed to be going in the other direction, but that's what happens when you give somebody instructions and then they take several weeks to actually carry them out. So what I'll do is I'm just going to lay the other half of the rudder up against this, and we'll just square across so that I get the exact same spacing. So I'll just set up my laminate trimmer to do like a 1/16 of an inch cut, so we'll split the difference between the two sides on this. And I think I can just freehand this for the most part. It doesn't need to be neat and tidy. It can be pretty sloppy, and we'll just have epoxy filling in around the edges anyway. So that looks pretty good, and I need to remember to bevel the edge off a little bit right around there. So we'll just take a utility knife, and I'm just going to scribe around these shapes here. Again, I'll just freehand it. And this is just going to make it a little easier to route it out, because you'll see the wood kind of chip away near the edge of that line when you get close to it. Ultimately, I don't mind having a little slop around that, because I want to make sure the two halves of the rudder blade come together nice and clean once this is put in there with epoxy. I want to be able to have a little bit of wiggle room to get those two halves perfectly united.
These videos are made possible due to the financial support of my followers on Patreon. On Patreon, we offer earlier video releases with longer educational descriptions, exclusive content, and various levels of personalized mentorship to help you with your own projects. please consider joining us. There's a link in the corner or down in the description.
Okay, this is ready to glue up. Just give this a little clean up. Brush it out with a Scotch-Brite pad. Okay, so here we go. So I'm just going to start with wetting this out with unthickened epoxy. I want this to be a really good bond, obviously. This is a particularly nice lightweight piece of red cedar. Okay, so I'm going to be using high density filler. For the reason for that is because I'm using that hardware there. I want a really strong bond around the hardware. Okay, I think that's pretty good. There we go, that's 100%. I noticed the offset between the hardware and the rudder I've created is the same size as the key stock. And so I want to really try and make sure that this is as close to completely perfectly aligned. We don't want the steering off by a few degrees. That would be terrible. We've got our little wooden plug here. And I've got a couple alignment holes here from before when I was cutting these out, I believe. So let's see if those will grab. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. This guy. I absolutely love these deep body clamps. I often wish I had more of them, or I had ones that are deeper still. It's looking good. I got a nice even squeeze going all the way around. And I can't emphasize enough how valuable a tool having a really flat bench like this is. I mean, I went to some pains to try and get this as flat as I could get it. I set up a rail and sled system with a router to flatten it all out before I put the melamine on here, and I'm really glad I did that, because just having one surface that's really reasonably good and accurate just saves you so many headaches. And the effort of doing that was more than paid off in the time it saved me over the years. Okay, I just want to give myself some reference points, and so I've got the edge of my rudder marked out with those cross-sectional divisions, and I'm just going to give myself a few lines on here to follow. So I've got my template that I've created, and I'm just going to quickly pick off some widths on it, just so that I've got something to quickly eyeball as I'm shaping it. So I'm just working off the glue line in the center. Okay, and here's something you can do if you want to. It's not critical, but you could actually drop some pins in here. And then we could use a little batten. Come on, stay put. Not sure, I might need a third hand to make this happen. Important to have third hands everywhere in the shop. Nope. No, that doesn't want to stay. I'm not sure how helpful that really is, but it gives me a little something to go off of. Actually, that worked pretty good. I'll just do that on the other side. All right, there we go. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So that's just our major amount of material that has to come off, and obviously up here it stops short, but it's going to continue on, fare out towards the midships point. And we need to keep things a little meatier up here, it should be said, because of course that's where the rudder stock is. So we've got some rough lines laid out on the side of our rudder here, and now we're going to have to start tapering. So the big trick is, how do we hold this in place? So I've got a couple blocks set up here, and the idea is that those are going to hold the rudder over here, and I'm going to be working in this general direction as I plane. And down here at the other end, I've got a little keeper block that's hanging on to the rudder shaft, and I might have to put another clamp on top of that, but I don't know yet. We'll see how it goes. And as I move forward and I have to do the other side, I'm going to have to come up with another holding arrangement, so we'll worry about that when we get there. Okay, now I can't see any reason why I shouldn't use my slick as my first tool to try and remove some material here. Of course, I've got to be pretty careful when it starts doing stuff like that, to be mindful of how far it's splitting out. Now, so far I've got about a 1/4 inch of material left to take off of there. So I might just be careful about, I'll try going across grain here a little bit. Nope, doesn't like that. Nope, doesn't like that either. We're going to switch away from the heavy removal tools and go to something that's a little more controlled. While this is still a fairly large surface, I could whip this down pretty fast just with a hand plane. My next tool of choice for doing heavier work is using my 4 plane here. Number 6. I like this because it's got a nice bit of mass to it. Throw a little wax on there. Of course, we'll check our blade depth first. I'll go for a slightly aggressive cut. Alright, that's working okay, but I can feel my plane is not quite sharp enough. It's just kind of hanging up, feeling a bit abrasive. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to hit this a bit with the longboard, I think, and see how it fares out. That's looking pretty good. I'm coming pretty close to my line over here. I think I'm just probably about there on this side, although that's all going to get beveled off, so I'm not really worried about that.
I'm only concerned about what the shape is along this 1/3 of the cord. There we go. We're real close right there. Okay, good. Alright, I really have to flip this over now and do the other side. It's important that you do this step by step, or else you're going to get one side that's really finished, and then the other side you're going to have to start doing all the rough work on, and it can be hard to sort of balance that out. So I'd rather just take the whole thing in stages, one side then the other side, boom, 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 boom. See, it's a nice gentle curve, but so far that worked really well. So we'll flip it over, we'll do the other side. Okay, we've got our first side already trimmed out here. By trimmed out, what I mean is I've got my initial bevel, taken the bulk of the meat off of the tail end of my foil shape, and there's going to be another bevel that happens that takes this little cheek off of here and reduces the thickness of this. But so I've got to do this side now, and I'm just going to pick up my overall width that I tapered it off on one side, and we're just going to quickly eyeball it to the other side, like so. Ultimately we're going to be coming down to a nice feather edge or something close to that, but we need some meat to hang on to it. I mean, as you can see, using this blocking system, there needs to be a bit of an edge, and so the only thing we can do to make this efficient to shape it is to leave enough meat there to hang on to our holding device until we're close to the end of the job. And then once we've got the bulk of it shaped, then we can figure out another way to hold it in order to finish off that last little bit of tapering. I honestly don't know what that method is going to be yet. I won't know until we get there, to be honest. So this wedge is just to lift the whole rudder up so that I'm clearing this blocking for my plane. Now that I have that established, what I want to do is just quickly mark off where my shapes are going to come to. So over here, this guy tapers out a little bit, but ultimately I need right about here where my shape tapers out. And do the same thing on the other side. We'll just sketch it across. Working on this side, we're there, and we're there, and I'm just using my ship sweep to draw this. I'm sort of picking up a shape that's sort of a little bit similar to the actual rudder here, and just carrying it over a little bit. And it flattens, straightens out a bit here. So there we go. We got ourselves a line that's just going to help keep us in control. We'll work to that line, and then we'll assess exactly what the next stopping point is going to be. If I can get some material off with my slick, it's great, but I'm finding the grain on this piece of cedar is really turning around on me a lot. Like, you can see how easily that broke out. And so I've got to be very careful about how much I want to try and use this. See, that last chip took me almost right down to my finished line, so this might be a real gamble to try and use it. Come on, stay put. the nice thing about a slick is you can see it, suddenly this guy was giving me some grief in terms of hanging on. And because of the length of the slick, I was able to put my arm down here to help hold this down. And just the weight of the blade alone is enough to take care of a lot of the work at that end. They're really wonderful tools to use if you can get your hands on a good quality one. It's a bit tough. Luckily there's a few blacksmiths that are operating these days making good ones. There's a few sort of off-the-shelf ones that are out there, but probably not nearly as nice. So here's a good example of just using the corner of the slick to drive yourself along. You can see I'm kind of carving a little bit of a shelf each time. Or you can push a wall of shavings like this. But the main secret is just these short stabbing motions. Nice and sharp. Don't try and do too much at once. And you control how much is coming off by the angle of your slick too. You can, if you want to get a heavier bite, you raise the handle. If you want a shallower bite, you drop the handle. And you really need this to be good and sharp, otherwise you're not going to bite in effectively. And that's one of the keys to sharpening, is it needs to be able to bite the surface and get that shaving started. One thing you can always do is, if you want to see your progress, you can always take some chalk or pencil or whatever and scribble over the surface. Now, I'm not ambidextrous. I'm not left-handed. Working on boats, there's a lot of times you just cannot work in the other direction, even if you want to. So I'm going to keep picking away at that until I've got a nice flat facet running from my line there to my line here. And then we'll move on to laying out the next line. And it's pretty much the same thing over and over again, just figuring out, looking at the drawings, trying to get a good idea as to what I need to do to remove the next bulk of material until we slowly work our way down to our refined shape. I want to start fairing in the leading edge here, and I need to work up a transition between this area and this area. This has got to transform into a foil shape or a parabolic curve, but this has to stay full. Now I could just cut a sharp line here and work that curve in. The one thing I don't like about that is I'm going to glass this rudder, and having this sharp turn is something that's a little bit difficult to achieve in fiberglass very effectively. So I'm thinking for the moment I'm just going to try a soft transition. And so to that end I'm just going to use a gouge here to just start working it down. block is kind of getting in my way here, so just shave it down a bit. I'm going to be careful. I know there's a couple screws hiding in there somewhere that's holding it in place. So I'm moving from my initial facets down to my finished shape, and that really just involves basically taking the hills off of our facets and creating smaller ones. Now normally I would be very systematic about this, but this is such an organic shape, I'm finding it easier just to do it by feel. And as I go, I've got my templates here that I'm just dropping over top and just taking a quick look at how they fit. Now of course I can't really even use them until I've got this front edge rounded over, because of the contour in here really restricts your ability to use those accurately. My luthier's vise seems to be about the perfect animal for holding this. It's getting closer. Okay, I'm liking that. I got a little flat spot right here, but I think that's going to fare out. I got more work to do. Just now I'm getting closer. Well, after much fairing and sanding, we get our job done. We move on to fiberglass. We'll fill out this glass with a few more coats of epoxy before paint. All right, that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed that. Please join us again next time on the 2.4 meter project. And until then, get out of the house, go out to the workshop or the garage or the backyard or whatever. Get your hands dirty, go build something. Ciao for now, folks.